Hello, I'm Matthew Jarron, Museum Curator at the University of Dundee and Coordinator of the Public Art Dundee project, and welcome to the latest in my series of virtual public art walks. And this is the second in a number of tours that we're going to be doing focusing on the city centre. So here we are in City Square, or rather outside City Square, because unfortunately this is as close in as I can get on Google Streetview. Obviously for many years cars could drive right round it, but in the 1980s it was redeveloped, and since that time of course it's been completely pedestrianised. So what I'm going to have to do is cut into photos of the various features in the square, and we'll start off with the ones that are original to the creation of City Square itself. So the square was laid out 1932 to 3, designed by the architects J.J. Burnett and James McClellan Brown. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this is it shows how architectural and design tastes had changed dramatically by the 1930s. So of course in the Victorian time, having really fancy decorative carving was really a kind of symbol of how important your building was. By the 1930s, that had been replaced with a fashion for a kind of austere elegance. So Art Deco was in fashion, but a very minimalist form of Art Deco was fashionable in Scotland. And so at the time that City Square opened, there was a kind of fancy brochure produced about how wonderful it was, and it actually specifically states that decorative features have been kept to a minimum, as if that's a really good thing. And so there are only a number of very small and discreet pieces of decorative carving, whereas, had it been done 30 years earlier, there probably would have been all sorts of really grand decorative features. So first of all, on the front of the city chambers itself, we see obviously the city crest. We see a number of pieces marking different trades in Dundee. And then above we see these nice little pieces featuring medieval trading cobs. And they are paired on the opposite side of City Square with these pieces showing Viking longboats. So both of them I think meant to represent the fact that international trade and partnerships in Dundee have gone on much further than is usually thought. And then down here we have these beautiful, I think this is probably my favourite bits, these wonderful Art Deco style sort of marine scenes with little seahorses and fish and so on them. In 1937, this bronze plaque was added, marking the site of Strathmartin's Lodgings, which was one of the many wonderful historic buildings that got demolished to make way for City Square. This was created by William Armstrong Davidson, who was head of metalwork at Dundee College of Art, now Duncan of Jordanson. And there's another plaque on the other side of the city chambers showing the pillars, the Dundee Townhouse, which of course once stood where City Square now is. This presumably was done at the same time as the Strathmartin Lodging one, but it's not signed, and it seems to be a much kind of more basic style than the one that Davidson did. So I'm wondering if it was maybe actually done by one or more of Davidson's students, maybe? Not sure. The next piece to go up was the Polish memorial. So this was put up in 1943 and was gifted to Dundee by the Polish soldiers who had been stationed in Dundee during the early part of the war. It was created by one of the Polish soldiers, but unfortunately his name hasn't been recorded. If anybody knows, do please let me know. It is, as far as I know, the only piece of public art to appear in Dundee during the Second World War, so it's quite important from that point of view. We then fast forward to 1988, when, as I mentioned, the whole of City Square was refurbished, and these fountains were created by the sculptor Lisanne Kempsel. So there are 4 plaques representing the 4 of the ancient elements: fire, water, earth and air. And each one has a specific poem to represent one of those. So fire features a poem called The Market Cross by Joseph Lee. Water features Lunan Bay by Mary Brooksbank. Earth has The Tod by Violet Jacob. and Air has the Gale by David Blythe. And they were funded thanks to European regional development funding. So one of many pieces of art in Dundee that were created thanks to EU, or at least the equivalent of the EU funding. And then much more recently, in 2012, a couple of markers were added on the ground here. One to mark the site of St Clement's Church, and then another to mark yet again the townhouse. And it's quite astonishing, the number of different memorials to the townhouse. I'm not quite sure why we need so many, but it's really ramming the point home that we used to have this amazing building called the townhouse, and now we don't have it. But there's no denying that having a large open space like this is really important for, you know, major public gatherings and so on. And of course, there's so many different ways in which the city square is used. Okay, so let's see what else we can see. One of the first things to notice, actually, and you'll see some of them here, are the bollards here, and you'll see these nice railings here, and flower baskets as well. I'll just zoom in here. And all of this is part of a hugely extensive suite of street furniture that was all designed by the artist David F. Wilson, who had been one of the first graduates of the pioneering Public Art and Design MA course at Duncan and Jordanson. And those of you that saw my first city centre tour will have seen the bollard at the top of Cooties Wynd, and that was really the starting point for this suite of street furniture. It was kind of done as a test piece by the Dundee Public Art Programme, and on the strength of that, the City Council then went ahead and commissioned this whole suite of street furniture, starting in the Murraygate in 1993, extending down here to the High Street by 1995, and then also encompassing Panmure Street and Cowgate as well. And it was funded by Dundee District Council and Scottish Enterprise Tayside, and like many pieces around that time, had funding from the European Regional Development Fund as well. So I think this is about as close as we're going to get into these, but just outside Boots here we have what are now known as the three icons. So we have these three little bronze sculptures of the Royal Arch, the Wishart Arch and Cox's Stack. And these were created along with the relief map of Dundee that various people are sitting on here. These were created by the artist Doug Cocker, but weren't intended to be here. They were originally part of a separate scheme that the Dundee Public Art Programme did in Dens Road as part of wider environmental improvements that the District Council were doing at that point in the early 90s. Doug was commissioned to create a whole series of sculptures along Dens Road, and in the end, for various reasons, only two of those were actually sited. And if you take a look at my Hilltown tour, you will be able to see the two that were actually put there. But these three had been completed and then weren't sited, and they basically sat in a cupboard for years. And meanwhile, there have been various different plans to create some kind of landmark public art piece here right in the city centre, basically on the sort of crossroads between the High Street, Reform Street and City Square. And various different artists have been approached. There have been all sorts of different discussions. Lots of different proposals were made. But ultimately, the City Council and the other key members of the Dundee Partnership that would have funded the piece simply couldn't agree on what to put here. And this, of course, was the big problem. The more central you got, the harder it was to get people to actually agree on an actual piece. And so they never ended up creating this kind of major, big landmark piece that the city centre arguably ought to have. And as part of the redevelopment that was going on here, Prince Charles was coming to open the refurbished city centre in July 1995, and they kind of thought we really need something here to kind of provide a central point, and so that he can officially open something. And then somebody had the bright idea, I think it was actually David Robertson in the engineering department, who had the bright idea of getting these 3 pieces out of the store and mounting them on plinths here as a little kind of, well, much smaller replacement for this kind of massive piece. And it was these that Prince Charles, I think, whipped a cloth off or something to officially open the refurbishment of the city square. So they kind of seem slightly out of scale now, but at least they're here and not still stuck in a cupboard. And the nearest we got to a kind of major landmark piece in the city centre are the hugely popular statues of Desperate Dan and Minnie the Minx that we see here. Now, you would think it was kind of a blindingly obvious thing to do to celebrate the amazing comics legacy that Dundee has in public art. Dandy and the Beano, of course, were 2 of the world's longest running comics, and one of the things that Dundee is most famous for around the world is being really one of the major world centres of comics production. And yet, there was considerable resistance to the idea of actually depicting any of the DC Thomson comics characters in statue form. Partly resistance from DC Thomson themselves, because they were kind of always quite reluctant to actually kind of specifically localise these universal characters to one particular place. But I think largely from the various artists that were running the Dundee Public Art programme, because at that time it was still the case that comics were very much looked down upon as a lesser art form. Thankfully, I think that opinions have changed quite a lot over time, and there's a far more serious academic study of comics. But it definitely took some persuading to get everyone on the table to agree to actually create these. But, of course, the results are undoubtedly one of the most popular pieces of public art in the city. And so the art was entrusted to Tony and Susie Morrow. And although they worked collaboratively, Tony very much concentrated on Desperate Dan, while Susie concentrated on Minnie the Minx. And they were unveiled in 2001, funded by the Dundee Partnership with some support from DC Thomson. Now, if I just zoom into this little doorway here, you'll see one of a whole series of bespoke gates that were created in the city centre by the company P. Johnson and Company, who are based at Rathobyres Forge. This particular one, this is Crooms Close. This was created in 2000, and these were all made as part of a facade enhancement scheme that the City Council had to try to improve the appearance of some of the premises in the city centre. Each design is unique, based on research into the history of the premises or of the local area. So in this case, these little circular designs are based on trade tokens, partly because James Wright Jr., famous coin maker, lived nearby here and made trade tokens for Croom, whose close this is. But they also are kind of meant to represent dragon scales, again linking to the story of Dundee's dragon. Now, if we just head up New Inn entry here, I don't think we'll be able to do it on Street View, but we should be able to cut here. Okay, so we come to the wee passage here out into New Inn entry, and we're just outside the Keeler shopping centre here, and you can just see another of the P. Johnson & Co. gates sort of lurking there. This lovely Lillian spiral gate. This one was done in 2000. And Streetview hasn't actually updated this yet, but unfortunately these 4 murals have all gone now. So we have 3 of the open-close doors here, and I've talked about open-close in my previous city centre tour, so you can find out all about it there. But these were designs created by Bleach, Fizyan and BFL. And then over here we have this lovely Keeler's mural that was created by the artist Simon Matheson in 2018. And all 4 of these murals were actually painted over in order to create a new text-based piece for Dundee Design Festival last year called The City Is Yours, which was created by Rachel E. Miller, Katie Guthrie and Emma Chapman. But there is still one of the original 2017 open-close doors here just opposite this, which is by Paco Graf, showing one of his famous trademark kingfishers. Okay, so we'll just head back into the high street again. Right, now our next piece is just right along here. So this information board is another of the street furniture pieces created by David F. Wilson. But on top of it, you'll notice this little monkey who's rather wonderfully rearranged the letters information to spell in ma fair tune, which isn't actually an exact anagram if you work it out, but it's pretty close. So this is one of a trio of wonderful animal sculptures that was created by Angela Hunter, commissioned in 2003 and completed in 2006. And you saw, of course, the penguins in the previous city centre tour, and there is also a squirrel elsewhere, but I'm not going to show you where that is. John Gray, the City Council Public Art Officer, is always very keen that these little sort of hidden things that you don't actually at first notice, and you just kind of come across them by accident. And so I'm not going to tell you where the squirrel is, but look out for a squirrel elsewhere. But the monkey is there as a link to the ancient Lady Mary Fair that used to be held on this site every year. And for many years there was an organ grinder with his pet monkey that was a very familiar sight there. And so the monkey has escaped from the organ grinder and is causing havoc, as you can see here. Now, I'm not sure how clear we're going to be able to see it. But just as the entrance to the Dundee Backpackers here, there is another of the gates by P. Johnson and Company, this time going into Gray's Close, and that one was done in 2003. And then just above here, sort of hidden by the trees actually, so I'll just cut into another photograph here. We have another model of the townhouse. Again, on my first city centre tour, we saw the one that was outside the Pillars Bar. And like the other one, this one was also made in 1932, at the time that the original townhouse was getting demolished. This one was made by the architect William Friskin. It's made of aluminium and was cast at Messrs Brown and Company in Montrose. Originally it was actually just a bit further along the road at number 75, but it was moved here to number 73 as part of the restoration of Gardine's Land, this wonderful medieval building which was turned into a youth hostel. And then there's another of the gates here. Unfortunately, it's actually open here. So this is Campbell's Close, but I'll cut to a photo so you can see it properly. And that one was done in 2001. Now, also worth pointing out the Royal Bank of Scotland building here, which has some quite nice decorative carving on it. That building dates from 1899 by the architect George Washington Brown. Now, this is the Jute Women's Clock. This was created in 2006 using one of David F. Wilson's lamppost stands, and then with the base added by John Gray with a quotation from a famous poem by Mary Brooksbank. Now, here we have, again, one of the most popular pieces of public art in Dundee, the wonderful dragon. So the dragon was originally designed by Alistair Smart, a very popular sculpture lecturer at Duncan of Jordanson in 1992, but Smart sadly died, having only just completed the original maquette of the sculpture, and you can see that in the McManus. And one of Alistair's students, Tony Morrow, was then entrusted with carrying through the commission to completion, and Morrow, although using the same basic design, altered it in various ways. He gives the dragon much more of a kind of classic dragon-y appearance, really. He's got a much longer nose and bigger claws and more scaly appearance. And the result was completed in 1994 as really the kind of major landmark piece of the redevelopment of the Murraygate. So originally he actually stood up on the junction of Murraygate and Commercial Street, but was actually moved just over the other side of Commercial Street in 1996. Now this, oops, going the wrong way there. This very splendid building that the dragon sits beside is the old Clydesdale Bank building. There we go. There's a better view of it there. It's now Optical Express. And this was built in 1876, designed by the architect William Spence, but with the various carved figures by the Glasgow sculptor James Charles Young. This is actually one of the few instances where we actually know who did the carving on a Victorian building. So it's got Britannia at the top here, with her lion. And then this is Commerce here, with these coins falling out of her dress, and then Justice over here. Right, now, at the top of Castle Street here, we have this nice decorative pole marking Castle Hill. And this was designed by David F. Wilson, again, and made of copper, glass and steel. And these were done in 2004 as part of, again, major improvements to the Castle Street area. And David also designed these lamp brackets that you'll see down the street as well. I should just point out the nice decoration on Madigan's, the cafe and bookshop here. That was done by Laura Darling. And the other thing to point out, which is going to be pretty difficult to see, in fact we're not going to be able to see it from here I don't think, but I'll cut to a photo, is on top of the old Theatre Royal building here there's a bust of Shakespeare. Presumably put in at the time the building opened in 1810. It was Samuel Bell, architect. So one of the oldest pieces of decorative carving that we still have in situ. Another of the wonderful P. Johnson & Co. gates here. This one into Doig's Court that was done in 1999, and because it's next to the music shop, it's meant to represent sound waves. And then there's another one right here for number 36, and that one was done in 1999 as well. Now, see if we can get a good view here. Yeah, so this is the very grand but very narrow entrance to Stewart's and Son, which was an old whisky company. The building was designed by Frank Thompson in 1919, so I assume that these rather splendid gates and the glass panels here were done at that time. And then just on the ground here, another part of the same business, they also ran a cocktail lounge next door called the Glengarry, and this rather nice little mosaic piece was created to mark that. I'm guessing from sort of 20s or 30s, but I've not really been able to find out any details of that. And then just at the bottom of Castle Street here, we have, as well as another of David's pillars there, we also have these nice metal and glass features on the wall outside the old Exchange coffee house where the shore now is. And these are kind of representing the fact that the water used to come right up to this. This is basically, we're right on the shore now. And so this is meant to represent the kind of rippling water and sort of shimmering light and so on. And that was done in 2001. Right, I'm now going to head along Exchange Street. And just want to point out this rather nice little leopard mural here on the side of this vintage clothing shop. And this is one of a number created by a chap called Rich Davies, who runs the shop, and also the barbers opposite. That was created in 2018. And then here we have another of these really nice P. Johnson gates. There's so many of them. This one at the back of Morton's Bond. And again, because this was, this is at the back of Dock Street, and we'll see some of the other designs around the front of the building in a moment. So it's deliberately representing a ship in water. And then there's another set of gates on the corner here, for once not designed by P. Johnson & Co. In this case by Lorraine Matheson from 2005. So again, I'll have to cut to a photo because you can't really see it here because it's open. So there's a moon on this side, and then if we go around the other side, you'll see there's a sun on this side. And what you probably can't see here, but if I actually maybe go further up the road so that you can see it from a distance, it's maybe too much of a distance, you'll be able to see the little finial on the top of the building as well, which was also designed by Lorraine Matheson. And I'll cut to a photo of that so you can get a better shot of that. Also, while we're here, we have another of the P. Johnson gates here, and that one's 2006. Right, we're going to head down onto Dock Street, and now we'll go around to the front of the Morton's Bond building, and you'll see there's lots of metalwork, again by P. Johnson and Company, done at the same time in 1996 to 7. This was, again, like all of these, a Dundee Public Art Programme commission, but in this case funded by Hillcrest Housing, who built the flats here. So you'll see that all of the different windows have these lovely little balconies or other metal grills. So there's more on the gate here, and then a little feature in here, these little vents here. And so all of this is meant to represent either wave patterns or ship's knots. So again, relating to the fact that this was once right up at the dock side. And then on top of the building, there's also a really nice little pediment with this nice relief stone carving, and that was by Gillian Forbes and done at the same time. Now, where the wine press is here, you can't see it on this, but this door has since been painted with a new mural by the artist Leslie Simpson, and that was just done last year. Okay, we're now going to jump over to Slessor Gardens, and just want to point out a few pieces here. First of all, if we just head down here, again, this hasn't been updated, but on this blank bit of hoarding here, there's a mural that was commissioned for World AIDS Day last year from the artist Paco Graf. So let's head along here, and just on the ground here there are a series of little illustrations to mark the site of the Royal Arch. Again, one of the very familiar Victorian landmarks of Dundee that was originally demolished to make way for the various road realignments that had to happen when they built the Tay Road Bridge. These were created by the City Council in 2015. Just when we get to this corner here, we should just note over the far side on Dock Street the wonderful frontage to the abandoned ship bar that was done by the Australian artist Steen Jones, working for Rich Davies, who did the nice leopard mural that we saw on Exchange Street, and that was in 2018. Now, unfortunately, Google Streetview doesn't actually let me drive down this street. It hasn't obviously filmed it as yet. But a couple of things to point out. First of all, just on the hoardings all round the Slessor Gardens, there are various poster spaces that occasionally get used for temporary exhibitions, so it's always worth taking a look to see if anything new has appeared there. But the other thing, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to see here, but I'll cut to some photos, is an interesting project called Discovery Walk, which has had two phases so far in 2016 and 2018, and hopefully there will be a third phase as well. And this is a project led by Kelly Marr and involving various people, including myself, I'm glad to say, with wonderful plaques designed by Whimsical Lush, aka Suzanne Scott, commemorating notable Dundonians who've contributed to discovery and exploration. And really beautifully designed, and with some extremely well written text by yours truly. Okay, so I'm just going to cut to the other side of Slessor Gardens. So here we are, and we're just going to go along past V&A Dundee. I just want to point out this mural coming up on the right here. Wonderfully colourful piece, and this was created by the artists Martin McGuinness and Fraser Gray in 2018. And then we'll just head along to Discovery. So the first thing to point out are these nice gates here with this kind of nice water spray pattern on them, and also on the top of the building there's this little globe finial here, and both of them were designed by the sculptor David McClelland. And then here in the foreground we have this nice pebble mosaic here that was designed by Maggie Howarth, and they were all created as part of the opening of the building in 1993. And then the penguins were added on top of these bollards by Tim Chalk in 2001. And that's where we're going to end this next part of our city centre tour, but we'll be back for more at some point in the future. So I hope you found that interesting, and look out for more tours coming soon. Bye for now.